Hello folks, I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm going to approach a topic which I think is very important for people flying in VR. And since you're watching this video, I presume that you do fly in VR or are thinking about it. Now, performance is the number one problem for VR right now, particularly when using complex sims like DCS, Microsoft Flight Simulator, X-Plane 11. They all demand an insane amount of power from your computer, and most of the time I'm pretty confident you're not going to be getting the native frames per second of your headset. And what I mean by that, for instance, imagine the Reverb G2, you've got it at 90 Hertz. Really, you need to be running your flight sim at 90 frames per second if you're not going to use motion reprojection. That will make everything feel super smooth and beautiful, but to be honest, I'm sorry to say that's never going to happen in pretty much most of the sims apart from VRFSG and maybe IL2 if you're lucky. So what is motion reprojection? Well, depending on the headset you have, it might be called something else. Like for instance, Oculus call it asynchronous time warp. In Pimax land, they call it smart smoothing. Windows Mixed Reality call it motion reprojection, which I'll be referring to. Steam VR call it motion smoothing. You know, it's never ending, but really it all means the same thing. And what it is, basically, it adds additional fake frames in order to simulate the correct sort of smoothness that you would experience if you were running at native frames per second of your headset. So as I say, another example would be the Quest. I run that at 80 Hertz, so really I need to be running that at 80 frames per second in order to really enjoy the smoothness of that headset. It's just not going to happen, folks. And many of you don't like using motion reprojection, so I thought I could give you my top tips on how to avoid ghosting and stuttering and just, where to look and where not to. And really that's essential when it comes to flying. So with that being said, my first tip is when taxiing without motion reprojection on, if you're turning, you will absolutely experience stuttering in the far distance. Say you're looking at a hangar and you're moving from left to right, you will experience micro stuttering, and if you try and fixate on an object, it will hurt your eyes. So my advice is, when taxiing on the ground, if you have a G1000 with synthetic vision, look at your G1000. It will be super smooth, and when you turn on the taxiway, it'll be really nice to look at. If you do not have a G1000, then I'd recommend looking at a fixed point on the ground at your sort of 10 o'clock down on the ground. If you stare at that fixed point, and then when you stop moving, that rotational sort of stuttering will stop, and going forward on the taxiway will feel fine again. That's my first tip. My second tip is do not look 90 degrees down at the scenery when you are below 2,000 feet, okay? Make sure that when you're flying around that you look between your 10 o'clock and your 2 o'clock, which can be sort of, onto the ground and up into the air, that's fine. And even to the side can be okay, but looking straight down, okay, will give you ghosting and stuttering. It's going to happen, folks, unless you use motion reprojection. For tip number 3, avoid flying fast and low over the ground without motion reprojection. I do not recommend it, particularly if you're going to be, really banking quite sort of frantically, saying the Just Flight Hawk, you're having some fun. Do not look sideways whilst turning without motion reprojection, because you will see sort of the sky and the horizon just like judder like crazy. And I don't know about you guys, but it does hurt my eyes. Therefore, if you do want to fly low and fast, I'd recommend looking straight ahead, or again at your 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock positions. That's very important. Now for tip number 4, and this is really important, folks. Ensure that your PC is set up so it does not drop below 30 frames per second. That is so important, okay? Because essentially that is a third of the native refresh rate of the Reverb G2. And what that means is it's more bearable. If it gets into the mid-20s, then you will experience very unpleasant stuttering, and it will feel pretty awful, and your eyes will fatigue very quickly. So for instance, I always make sure my worst case scenario is London City in bad weather. If I can get 30 frames per second there, I can get it anywhere. And for my final tip, this is something I've always said and I think I need to say it again. The way I fly is if I am flying VFR and I'm looking at the ground, my head is outside of the cockpit most of the time, and I'm really looking at points of interest, then I would absolutely use motion reprojection. It's why I love the Reverb G2, and I actually prefer it over the Aero when I'm flying low and slow, or even low and fast actually, across the ground when I need smoothness. Now just bear in mind that Varjo are going to be bringing their own motion prediction very soon, as well as some other exciting features, so really cool. But for the time being, as I say, the Reverb G2 and the Oculus Quest 2, Meta Quest 2, they are kings for motion reprojection. So all in all guys, I know it's complicated, this subject, but I would recommend those tips that I've mentioned, which are basically to look at a fixed point when taxiing, make sure that you don't look 90 degrees at the ground, avoid flying fast and low without motion reprojection unless you're looking straight ahead, or 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and ensure your computer is running at 30 frames per second or preferably 40 frames per second. Thank you so much for watching folks. Please let me know in the comments what your experiences are. Take care, bye for now.